Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully the sun is shining where you are, although I was on a call with our Scottish steering group, and it was a bit damp up there, bright and sunny where I am in sunny Essex. So welcome to today's webinar. We're talking about the pharma industry today, and I'm really pleased to be joined by three experts. We've got Adam from Astrazeneca, we've got Eddie from Roche, and Lucy from GSK. I'll get them to introduce themselves properly in a moment. If you haven't joined one of our webinars before, just a little bit of an idea about how it works. The four of us are going to have a sort of a panel debate for roughly the next half an hour, 40 minutes or so. But we do want this to be as interactive as possible. So if you've got questions you'd like to ask the panelists, please use the question platform on the questions box, dialog box on the platform. If you see me looking to the side, it's not because I'm getting disinterested or distracted by something else. It's because I've got two monitors, and that's where I'll keep track of the questions. So I will then feed those questions into our very knowledgeable panelists as we go along. Also, we record all our webinars and they get put onto our website, and you will also get a link later on today, all those that registered with a recording of the webinar. So you will have you'll be able to go back and revisit anything that you missed that you want to catch up on, or please do share it amongst people in your team. Of course, we're very keen to share this knowledge as much as possible. So just a little bit about why we're doing this session. We do have a number of organisations in the pharma industry that are our members, but there aren't enough that we did a session as part of our HE Careers Advice Conference. We thought it'd be a really useful thing to do for members, and that's been shown by, we had well over 80 people register for this event today. So this session is really about talking about the industry, what the opportunities are there, a little bit of explanation around the industry, and what employers are thinking about in terms of their early talent strategies. So that's the subject matter that we'll be covering. As I said, please do pop questions in as we go along, and I'll feed those to the panelists. So let's do introductions first of all. So just to get an understanding for our panelists, the organisations they're in, and also actually what's happening in terms of recruitment at the moment. So I'm sure you're all keen to know what's happening with vacancies now and in the future. Adam, I'll go along the order I can see on my screen. So would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. So hello, everyone. My name is Adam Isle. I'm the Talent Acquisition Lead globally for AstraZeneca's early talent programs, and that covers everything from summer placements and studentships, industrial placement students, graduates, postdocs, and PhDs, etc. I've been with AstraZeneca about 6 years now. Background primarily in recruitment, predominantly in the technical and scientific space too. And I run our recruitment for early talent in the UK with a number of my team who support the candidates directly, and some of you may have already met in the past. But nice to be part of this process, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Adam. And what's happening with recruitment at the moment, Adam? I mean, obviously the pharma sector has been in the public eye over the last 12 months. Is recruitment healthy? Are recruitment numbers going up?
Yeah, I think we've found that throughout the whole pandemic, actually, we didn't really pause as an organisation, and some of that may have been on the back of the COVID work, obviously, that everyone was doing. And we've been quite fortunate to be able to continue to progress with pretty much everything that we had planned. I think there was a small impact last year on summer placement students, for example, when we were having a lot of working from home type issues, and just getting them stood up successfully was a challenge in some areas, especially around labs, of course. But no, we've barely paused really. It's something that we've continued to do similar sort of numbers for this year that we did last year, which were similarly to the year before really. So it's fairly consistent.
Great, thanks, Adam. Eddie, would you like to go next?
Hello everyone, so my name is Eddie Okoro, so I'm from Roche. I've been in Roche for about 3 years now, or just over 3 years. So I am the UK lead for our early career programs, so have kind of started a lot of them from apprenticeships all the way up to medical doctor registrars. So we do a lot of programs that kind of span across Europe, but also across different kind of technical areas, so anywhere from commercial, early development, and product development. Our recruitment as such hasn't really kind of, same to Adam's point, hasn't really kind of tailed off. It's kind of been nice and healthy. We did a lot of work trying to move everything online. So a lot of online assessments centres, which has been pretty fun to run and to be a part of. But yeah, we as a company are going through a transformation at the moment. So our opportunities in the future will change, and hopefully for the better as well. We're trying to kind of be more connected globally when we talk about our early career programs. So yeah, lots of new exciting things coming up. But yeah, that's kind of me and where we're at.
Great, thanks, Eddie. And Lucy.
Hi everyone, I'm Lucy Hegarty. I'm the head of early talent recruitment at GSK, and much the same as Adam and Eddie said, that covers everything through from kind of school leaver through to postdoc in our recruitment. We do recruit across those levels globally, so lots of markets very active at the moment. We've got quite a bit of change going on in our organisation as well, same as Roche. We're actually splitting out our consumer healthcare division, so the focus will be much more on vaccines and pharmaceuticals for our business going forward. And I joined GSK from the tech industry about 18 months ago, so it's been an interesting ride.
And what's happening in your recruitment, Lucy? Our recruitment hiring, is that pretty strong at the moment?
It's pretty stable, barring transformation changes. So we are seeing perhaps a little bit of a kind of temporary pause on some areas where we're recruiting, but fundamentally in the long term, we're not looking to see much change. If anything, I would say there's perhaps a little trend towards more hiring in our technical and tough to recruit kind of areas versus some of our more general commercial and business areas, but hiring is still going on across the business.
Great, fantastic. Thanks, Lucy. Well, that's good to get positive messages from all of you in terms of hiring numbers. So Lucy actually gave a nice little segue then by talking about, you know, the different sides of GSK business. I mean, pharma's a pretty complex industry: research, production, you know, supply chains, of course dealing with the whole medical establishment, as well as actually having consumer products. You know, what are the sort of the key messages that you'd want to get across, Adam, in terms of actually the complexity of that industries, and maybe, you know, what it is that students in our audience need to sort of get their heads around a little bit?
Yeah, I think I'd probably say, rather than I mean, it is a complex industry. I think there's no getting away from it, but probably no more so than a lot of highly technical industries that students might be considering. I think the thing I always try and emphasize when I'm talking to students or careers advisors is the fact that there are almost every kind of job that you would want to do, you can find in the pharmaceutical industry, and you can do it in an industry where you will be developing and supporting production of life-changing medicines, which I think is an incredibly powerful thing for people to think about when they're considering where to start their career. So yes, there's variety. We're all representing what you'd call big pharmaceuticals, so the kind of organizations that do end-to-end early stage research through to launch of products and post marketing approvals, and that's a real strength when their students might be considering which sort of an employer to go to, one that does the whole linked up process. But there's also an incredible large number of opportunities in the contract manufacturing outsourcing space, the clinical research space, you know, medical communications. There's a real breadth of different sort of organizations that they can consider, which all, I would say, come under the pharmaceutical industry. So it may be that you want to be a specialist in an organization and you're, you know, doing a supply chain or a manufacturing type qualification, and you just think of the auto industry or the aerospace industry because that's very high profile in that sort of space. But you can do really challenging roles in pharmaceutical industries and have a really progressive career doing supply chain operations and manufacturing. But when pharma is first thought of by a lot of students, they're often thinking research and science. And I think we sometimes don't help that, because a lot of our imagery and a lot of our marketing perhaps in the past has been quite science and technical. But in Astrazeneca, for example, if you look at our graduate space, we hire more non-scientists into our graduate programs. There are numerous of them than we do scientists. So that would be my kind of first observation.
Eddie, Lucy, is there anything that you'd add to what Adam's just said?
I would just really agree. I think when I look at our graduate level hires, predominantly we're actually targeting engineering, technology, data analytics, areas actually where historically I think pharma has always played, for example, very well with females, and interestingly, of course, it's areas that really struggle to attract females. So I do sometimes wonder if there's a bit of a trick missed when talking to young females that maybe are looking for a career that feels more aligned to them from a sort of brand industry perspective, that sometimes we could talk more about those roles that Adam referred to around kind of manufacturing sites, and of course all the technology that goes behind creating our medicines. So yeah, I think that's a growing area of our industry, I would say.
Yeah, maybe just even to add to that, and Lucy's probably a good example maybe of this in terms of moving from tech industry into pharma. You know, I think there's a massive, like, you know, a miss kind of story about how people with great technical skills around data science can really add value to the pharmaceutical industry. I mean, there's a comment that was made around, you know, why would you want to kind of you know, make data mine social media data when you could actually kind of use those skills to, you know, to help support our development of our drugs, you know, to really help patients and you know, improve patients' lives. So I think there's definitely this trick that's missed in terms of, you know, really people understanding the various opportunities that you can apply yourself within the pharmaceutical industry.
Thanks. Eddie, just sticking with you, one of the subjects that we were going to spend a bit of time talking about was the whole diversity side of things. Lucy started talking about female in some particular areas of that they're keen to recruit into. But just as a broader picture, what are those challenges that organisations like Roche face in terms of attracting diverse candidates? I mean, are there particular groups you're targeting? Is there a more general sort of D&I approach that you're taking time to take? Just give us a bit of an insight into the broad picture.
Yeah, so for us specifically, it's more kind of aligned to socioeconomic backgrounds. And one of the reasons we found that to be the case is a lot of our roles are very kind of technically focused and require like degrees, masters, PhDs. And we all know, even just to get to university, there are a lot of barriers that people face just to get there. So from our perspective, you know, having a diverse thinking in terms of people from said backgrounds is massively important for us. And when we talk about females within science, and Lucy mentioned, you know, that's something that, you know, we're quite good at attracting females into our industry, and it is that. When we talk about kind of senior leadership, you know, that's a general kind of thing that, you know, most companies are trying to kind of address. But I think for us specifically, and I'm maybe guessing the same for Adam and Lucy, you know, that kind of you know, diverse talent that comes across well, from different socioeconomic backgrounds is massively important for us. And then you know, even ethnicities in terms of you know, Black people within the science industry is a massive one at the moment, and we're still discovering you know, trends as to why that is, but there's lots of things that we're trying to do in terms of, you know, engaging with people and kind of societies and charities to understand those reasons. But a lot of it does come down to kind of the socioeconomic background reasons as well, and also representation as well. So, you know, if you're trying to apply to a role, or you're trying to kind of understand an industry, if there's no one that, I suppose, that looks like you, is from a similar background to you, it can be quite daunting to try and you know, take that step into industry. So that inclusivity is massively important, which I think a lot of companies are trying to address at the moment.
And are you finding any particular initiatives that work better than others, that are really getting good results for you, Eddie?
Yeah, so we have a couple of programs which we kind of just launched this year. We've been doing bits and bobs over the last 2 years, but one of the things we find is, you know, to that point about underrepresentation, is that if, say, someone's, you know, hasn't been to university, they're first generation, they don't have their kind of, you know, immediate network to kind of help them understand how to get into industry. They typically might fall out of university because of that. They might not know the direction in which they need to get to. So we provide mentors. So these mentors are from industry who've been in their shoes in terms of, gone through the life of university and then into a first job. And actually the support and just having someone to talk to kind of demystify some of the questions that they have. And the questions could literally be around, like, how do I organize my diary, right? These are some of the simple things that we might take for granted that someone from a first generation background or from a background that doesn't have any connections or networks within the industry, needs. So, the mentorship program has massively helped to kind of close that gap. The second initiative is around student jobs. So, we all may have a situation where we're at university, we need to pay the bills, which we're trying to survive whilst at uni. And a lot of students have to take kind of part-time jobs, and these jobs aren't necessarily in line with what they're studying. I mean, every experience is great experience, right? But actually that kind of that step towards industry, in terms of, a lot of people looking for experience, they will lack that, because, having something on their CV which is related to, like, I don't know, Tesco or something, or, well, not that there's anything wrong with Tesco, but they fall short of those actual skills that they can build. So we basically created a student part-time job, which fits around people's studies, in which they can, relate their university degree and work. It's kind of virtual in the sense that they can do it from home, so they don't have to be in the office. It gives them an insight into the industry. They actually do some meaningful work that relates to their studies, and they're studying at the same time. So it's some of those initiatives, I think, have been really successful so far, and are gaining a lot of traction, especially those groups that I just mentioned, in terms of engaging with them as well. So
great, thanks,
yeah.
Eddie. And Lucy, you mentioned, targeting female candidates, particularly in those sort of engineering, maths, I guess what we typically call STEM type subjects. Do you want to expand a little bit more on the challenges and some of the work that you're doing to address those?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is a very typical challenge looking at just the student pool studying certain subjects. When you're trying to recruit your mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, very often the pool you're fishing in is not terribly diverse. And I think we're fortunate that as an industry within that pool, I think there is a story to share that can be very effective attracting females. I think probably where we struggle more is that earlier stage of the subject choices that students make. And I think when that's females going into tech, there are a huge number of initiatives. We offer a relatively small number of roles in some of these fields, so it's sometimes hard to get the business behind investing a lot in changing those choices. But I do think pharma can have a really interesting and important voice in those conversations and with those students. I think, to reiterate a lot of Eddie's points there, I think two of the biggest challenges when you look at things like socioeconomic background and also ethnicity in some cases is the visibility of careers, for one, in science in particular. I think if you don't have a parent or a parent's friend working in that field, a lot of people have kind of the vision of the mad scientist in a lab, and they don't really know what that entails and what that can do. I think the second thing is job security. The truth is, going into a lot of science fields, you will probably need to undertake a PhD for certain roles. And of course, that can be quite a daunting experience for students. It doesn't have the certainty of a paid for degree where you know you will go in and you will come out after X amount of time. It does require a lot of independence. It doesn't necessarily reward a huge amount financially up front. And of course, it's very risky if your funding drops, if the avenue of research you're exploring doesn't pay off. It's something that I think, again, might be afforded to students that have a bit more of a safety net. So again, when you're looking at students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds or from cultures where actually that career stability and financial stability would be seen as important, I think it can be a harder sell into those areas. Honestly, I wouldn't say we've necessarily landed on something that helps really tackle these challenges, but we're certainly looking to draw a lot more from our STEM education programs. I think historically it's something we've always seen as an important kind of CSR activity, that we're supporting teachers with STEM subjects and curriculum, but actually linking that a little bit closer to the careers available, just to get that message in as early as possible into schools, I think is something we hope will support then the talent pool at university, from which it tends to then be easier to recruit.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, these are long-term challenges, aren't they, that require interventions much earlier in the cycle that maybe some sectors are used to. And Adam, what's the picture at Astrazeneca? Is it a similar sort of set of challenges that you're facing and initiatives that you're taking part in?
Yeah, I think broadly, you know, apprenticeships are becoming, you know, increasingly valued, I think, within the organisation as a point of entry for typically post-compulsory education level applicants. But, you know, we're increasingly seeing those with degrees, you know, reskill and consider apprenticeships as an applicant as well. We would obviously welcome those too. I think one of the things that we're probably all going to say we struggle with is attracting candidates with highly numerate computer science, programming type skills into the industry. And I think that the main challenge that I think is that we get crowded out. That's a really competitive market for those skills from every industry. You know, it doesn't matter if you're a retailer or a tech company or a pharma company or aviation industry. You are all after those highly you know, mobile skill sets, and you know, we're just not as front of mind, I think, for a lot of those students when they're considering where they want to apply their skills. I mean, I think it was Eddie's point earlier, you know, if your passion is for machine learning, well, you can spend your time working on you know, understanding algorithms for social media activity and how to tweak those to maximize sales or promote engagement or whatever the organization is that you're trying to support. But, you know, you could do that in an organization like ours and help us discover the next generation of blockbuster drugs that might really help and impact, you know, thousands, if not millions of people worldwide. And I think whenever we have that conversation with students who have those right skill sets for us, it's very, very rare that doesn't excite them. That being said, then the salaries that they're able to command out and in other industries sometimes becomes the conversation, and social sort of socio-economic backgrounds plays into that still too. So I think it is a challenge, but probably we're probably no more challenged than many of the other industries that are out there in this sector. And I think just for the health of the UK economy generally, I think if we could get more students excited about this type of career or this type of skill set, they would find that they've got, you know, a progressive career for life that might, you know, move them between multiple industries because it's such a mobile skill set. I think, you know, having nephews and nieces that have gone through the education system recently, you know, I think the kind of work that Lucy's mentioned that GSK do in STEM outreach, and I know AstraZeneca and the other organisations in this sector do too, is really important. I just wish that we could turn students at secondary school on earlier to the opportunities that the industry can present, because, you know, genuinely a global industry doing some really fantastic work which can really offer satisfying, rewarding, challenging, exciting global careers if that's what people want. And in the UK, you know, we have some really strong organisations here, so we were very fortunate, and a established complex supply chain. So if you're interested in pharma in any country, you know, UK is as good a place to do it as anywhere. So, you know, and I think that we don't perhaps sell that as much as we could do to students.
God, definitely. Yeah, it's funny. My nephews, Johnson & Johnson, were due to be on this, but they just couldn't make the diary work. And my nephew's going to do his placement there. But I think part of the reason he knows about the roles is because his dad works in pharma and they've sort of lived abroad and things. So it is that challenge, isn't it? If you know people in the industry, it's easier. That understanding is inherent to when you're trying to break up to a much broader range of groups. Lucy, you mentioned a little bit around sort of PhD students, researchers. As somebody was misquoted in The Guardian over the weekend about the value of a postgraduate qualification versus getting work experience. Actually, this is one of the sectors, isn't it, where actually you do actively target for some of your roles relevant masters qualifications. Again, is that does that make the diversity debate even harder? Is it harder to find more diverse candidates pursuing some of those routes than maybe other groups? I don't know. Anybody want to talk to that piece?
Yeah, we've been looking at the data on this recently, and it does seem there is representation at these postgraduate levels. Like, it's not that you can't find diverse students taking these subjects. I just think particularly when you're looking at socioeconomic background, of course, you're asking students to invest another year before they're salaried. You're asking them to invest extra money to get a master's degree, maybe 2 years even to get full qualification, let alone if you're then talking about PhD postdoc. study. So I think we are trying to attract more students into this by recruiting people from bachelor's level onto sponsored PhD programs that GSK see through end to end. And I know there are other programs like this in the industry that try and give that kind of assurance that you have kind of an employer connection, you're getting hands-on experience with a big company on your CV during the period you're studying. And I think I would encourage students who are thinking about this kind of path but have those concerns about maybe that job security and getting that hands-on experience, looking into those, because they are available and they are actively designed to try and target maybe some of those institutions that we normally don't get visibility of students coming through with PhDs or with masters. But no doubt it is a difficult area to sort of encourage people through, and equally it is something you can do later in your career. If you do think the right thing for you is to go into a job with a big pharma organization, there will come a point where probably you will find it is the right thing to then move through a PhD program. But we do have internal programs where employees can get PhDs as employees with the company. It is possible. There are a lot of routes to get that further studies. So I think for people who can't take that route right now because the timing isn't right, it doesn't mean it's not going to be a career option for them in future to get that postgraduate qualification.
I've had a few questions through actually, and the ones I've had so far we'll come back to at the end, but one of them actually I think is probably quite a relevant one to squeeze in now. And somebody's asked, what actual roles, what are the specific roles that do require some form of postgraduate qualification? In my mind, it'll be the research roles. Is that a fair picture?
So at GSK, it's a kind of mix. We have R&D roles that do require it, but we have R&D roles that don't. I think it's particularly when we're looking at more kind of specialist areas where we're looking for oncology recruitment, or within vaccines, we're looking at mRNA, where we'd be looking for that more in-depth kind of qualification. Sometimes in data roles as well, but for most of the time, it's advantageous, not essential, depending on modules studied and things. Particularly with masters, it tends to be kind of a nice to have that may progress you further and onto more interesting placements and projects earlier, but it doesn't mean you can't go ahead without one. But then when we look at PhD programs, they do predominantly sit in the research and development space.
Is that the same with you, Eddie? I saw you nodding your head there earlier.
Yeah, it's an age-old conversation, so pretty much the same as Lucy. There's a lot of areas that it's very advantageous to have those types of qualifications, but again, it's not necessary in all areas. And I think maybe just kind of coming back a little bit as well, and the utilization of apprenticeships. So for instance, some areas require a master's degree in some of the data roles. There's a master's apprenticeship we can pretty much use as a graduate program, which basically just pulls in a grad who's just recently graduated, and instead of them trying to fork out money to do an MSc, we can get that fully funded for them, and then they get the work experience and then they get the degree. It's a kind of a win-win. So there are loads of things that we as an industry can do to really support people to get into those those higher end qualifications.
Same with you, Adam?
Yeah, and I think we probably have to accept the reality of the situation. I mean, the success of the policy to get more kids into higher education and the targets that were put in place, especially in the 90s, has risen expectations and meant that students, who perhaps in the past wouldn't have seen university as a career, as a route for them, and now going to university, and we'd love to applaud that. But what it's led to, one of those sort of unintended consequences, I'm sure, is that students themselves sometimes feel that to differentiate themselves from the competition, they have to take that step to get that master's level qualification, because now it's much more common that you go to university and you come out with a degree than it would have been 15, 20 years ago, say, for example. And unfortunately, hiring manager communities, try as we do to influence them and keep them broad-minded, if they are presented with a half a dozen candidates who've got the level, you've got that master's under their belt, and half a dozen candidates who have just got the bachelor's, their default, because probably recruitment isn't their core discipline, might be to say, well, why wouldn't I go for the candidate with the master's, without necessarily always thinking all the things through about the role and what really is required to be able to be successful in it. That being said, every year into our graduate programs, which are open at Astrazeneca to both bachelor's and master's level students, we always hire some bachelor students in, just because they put forward strong applications and they perform well at the assessments, and the point at which they enter our organisation, they're considered exactly the same. And I think that's probably an important point to raise. Once you're in the industry, apart from, and I'd agree with what's been said by Eddie and Lucy, some very specialist research roles, you don't have to have postgraduate qualifications to succeed. Once you've joined the organisation, many of us are representing really large organisations. Your ability and your commitment and your passion is what will drive your success as an individual in terms of your career. And there are many examples of those with PhDs and postgraduate qualifications who join, who don't necessarily progress, and have a stellar career in terms of speed with which they rise, and because their personal drivers and their ambitions don't lend themselves in that direction. So it's not just about whether they've got that qualification or not, but we have certainly seen, I think it's fair to say, in the last 5 years in our organisation, because of the rise in the applications inflation of expectation amongst the hiring manager community, more competition amongst students applying direct from university, and I think supply and demand just means that postgraduate qualification is a more common differentiator than it used to be.
Well, we started to talk about selection processes and competition to get roles, etc. So that's probably a good point to start talking about actually, selection process, transferable skills, and what is it, the kind of things that you look for, and how do you recruit for them? Eddie, can I start with you? Sort of, what are the key elements that you put into your selection process? What are the key things that you're actually, you are recruiting to? What are those skills and abilities you're looking for?
Yeah, so again, just echoing again some of Adam's points as well. It's like when we're trying to fight with the hiring managers or to select based on specific behaviors and mindsets, for instance, which is a really important element when you get successful candidates or successful people in role. So we typically recruit on a kind of 3-point kind of Venn diagram, as it were. So we look at motivations, passions, specifically, why do you want to work at the company? Why in the industry? What does it mean to you? So that driver, want to identify what that is. That second point then is that technical ability. So it could be degrees, it could be set backgrounds, programming languages, all the technical things that might be a baseline or a benchmark. But we don't go too hard on that, because we can learn, you can grow, you can develop, we can give you those kind of technical skills. And it's then that kind of third element, which is those behaviors and mindsets, which is it's huge and unique, and it's where people can bring their brilliance, their different perspectives into an organization or a team to help solve problems. And I alluded to this earlier, but one of the other challenges that I think is kind of industry wide or just not industry specific is neurodiversity. It's a really important topic, which I think people are starting to really understand the benefits that can support teams in creating solutions. So within our recruitment processes, we're trying to ensure that it is inclusive, that if someone who's autistic, for instance, who has eye gaze avoidance, isn't marked down because they didn't maintain eye contact in an interview. It's really trying to focus on those 3 elements, which are very, very unique and linked to role success, as opposed to any unconscious biases that we may have. So typically our processes are designed to focus on those 3 areas, reduce unconscious biases as much as possible. So that's practicing stuff like blind CVs, where the final stage interview panel, haven't seen the CVs, don't know who they're going to see. It's just a person, and they've got this set criteria in which they've got to assess that candidate, so that it's very geared towards the role. We do stuff where assessors don't talk to each other during the interview or just after the interview. They're only allowed to do that right at the end, because we try and avoid that conformity bias where, someone's like, oh, yeah, I really like this candidate, and that influences someone else to kind of see something that's potentially not there. So there's lots of things that we do to ensure that we reduce bias and focus on the things that matter in terms of role success.
Great, thanks, Eddie. And Lucy, you mentioned that you've still been hiring, very much like the rest of you through the pandemic. So I'm assuming you've had to sort of change the way you recruit and actually do a lot more stuff that you would have done face to face online. I mean, do you still do the same kind of exercises, just in a different context? What are the sort of those key elements that you put into your process, and how have you changed them?
Yeah, it's absolutely, it's really the beginning and the end of the process that's changed. All of the outreach, obviously, in trying to attract students to our pipeline, that used to have a lot of face-to-face elements, which of course at the moment it can't. And then of course the assessment centre was the stage in our process that was face-to-face, and prior to that everything would have been online anyway. So it really was that final stage we had to look at. We did decide to make a slight change to our content of the assessment centre, which was to turn our group exercise into an individual exercise. I think we were seeing a lot of mixed kind of advice from assessment providers as to whether more bias could creep in an online environment for candidates in a group session. So we decided to take that out in favour of the individual task. But it's very, very typical to what you'd see from other providers. So we look at an interview, we look at a couple of micro exercises, which are kind of 10-minute task-based exercises. And as I say, we now have this individual task, which used to be a group exercise, which focuses them on a particular issue, and they have to plan a kind of campaign essentially around a medicine. It's designed to assess all the same things that Eddie was talking about. So we do look at motivation, we look at alignment to GSK's values and expectations, which are really kind of the behaviours throughout the organisation that we look for, and the values match. And we do have some elements of technical assessment as well. So for certain roles, particularly in engineering or science, we would look to build in a technical exercise on the assessment day as well. And we tried quite a complex solution for managing all of this on a tool called Adobe Connect. But actually we have found more recently that Teams has served the purpose. Students are pretty familiar with it, and hopefully it makes it a little bit less daunting on the day that they're logging onto something that they know. So alongside the exercises, we do our best to try and make that an engaging experience as well, bringing the candidates together still so they get a chance to see, other students are there too. It's not just them and the assessors, and trying to build in sort of Q&A sessions with existing graduates and things, just so that, again, they're getting a bit of insight as well. It's not all about suddenly just focusing on the assessment, but no doubt that has been challenging. There are a couple of areas where historically we've actually done practical assessments. We have tried an interesting workaround where we were literally posting technical kits out to candidates and getting them to complete tasks on webcam to demonstrate dexterity and some of their kind of following of instructions, attention to detail, some of those things assessed through those kinds of exercises, which have for the most part actually gone quite well. They've been quite effective, but I know our business are keen to get back to face-to-face in some elements for that engagement and for those practical assessments.
Yes, of course. I always forget that actually in your sector, that's in some of the engineering sectors as well. Actually, there is a physical element to the selection process. It's not just sort of sitting in meeting room type assessment centre, is it? You actually do need those physical skills as well. Yeah. Adam, can I ask you a little bit around culture and values in the selection process? Is that something you build into your selection process and you're looking to assess and test as candidates go through?
Yeah, very much so. And like Eddie and Lucy, AstraZeneca's got sort of 5 values that we recruit into, whatever the nature of the organizational role that they've applied for. So we build that in a couple of ways, really. We have been piloting last year gamified values assessments with a partner organization called Pymetrics, who have built models based on success within an organization and the behaviors that we're looking for. And all candidates for most programs this year will be going through that at graduate level anyway. But we do it also at the assessment stage, which typically takes the place of a values-based interview. What students might sort of expect to see in a behavioural or a competency type interview. Give us an example of a time where, or that sort of stuff. We are trying to move a little bit more towards a more strength-based approach, which I know GSK have done a lot of work in that space on. But values are really crucial throughout. I've seen examples of candidates who have done incredibly well in technical interviews, but have still not been offered the role, even though they've astounded the assessors sometimes, because culturally and from a values perspective, they just don't share the values of the organisation. And I think it's important for us that at this stage in their career, we can normally do a great job of filling in those knowledge gaps and helping expose them to the kind of industry cutting edge practices from a technical perspective that will bring their skills up to speed, as long as they've got the foundation there. But it's really hard to change the values of an individual fundamentally, so it's really key. And like Lucy and Eddie, we've had this year a blend in particular of traditional format but online versions of that, and we would hope to go back to some more in-person activities as the pandemic recedes, but we shall see, because obviously there's a lot of advantages to doing things online from a kind of logistics and travel arrangements for the candidates, which I think actually plays quite well for the social mobility question. Some candidates who previously would have looked at the cost of a 2-night hotel and travel to and from different locations, and great, of course we can help them and they get to claim their expenses back, but one of the things that we're not as slick as we could be on is processing in expenses, because we're a big global company, and if you've got to wait 2 months until you get paid after you've laid out £300 and you're a student, and this is just one of the many assessments that you're going to, that starts to create an issue for you potentially. So online does alleviate that issue, and hopefully it means that the candidates are more open to it than in the past they perhaps might have been, and not intimidated by the pure complexity of trying to get themselves from A to B to a place that they don't know in time for an assessment, which is in itself then, with the best will in the world, still going to be a stressful experience. So there's been positives and learning experiences for us all, but the people at Astrazeneca, and I know the early talent community generally are this way inclined. We're very passionate about the programs that we have, and we're passionate about showcasing what we can offer and what the industry can offer to the students who come to see us, and we also want to see that spark in their eyes and see the way that they engage and how they respond to the stimulus that we provide them with as part of our sort of understanding of them as a candidate and what makes them unique. So Microsoft Teams has been a godsend. We were quite worried last year when we moved everything online at quite short notice around the kind of February-March period of time when the pandemic was really breaking through. But I think, like Lucy's mentioned and Eddie probably experienced too, it's second nature to many of these students already. So even though we've sometimes asked them to use more than one platform during a group exercise, we went ahead and ran group exercises this year. We did think about it, we weren't sure, but we did go with it, and I was concerned about how the students would cope with that need to pivot from receiving information in one platform to then demonstrating half an hour later after they just processed it, how they could engage with it with the students when they were opening up as a group, having done a little bit of research time on themselves on their own, but actually they were remarkably capable.
Adam, I've actually got a specific question for you. You might not want to do this depending on confidentiality, but somebody's asking, actually, if you've got a specific example where a candidate's values in the organisations haven't aligned. So it's going back to that point where somebody was technically very capable, but actually on the value side there wasn't a match. Is there anything that sort of brings that to life a bit?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, I mean, there's been a few times over the years where we've seen it, and I'm not as close to the detail as I used to be, but I remember a student who was incredibly strong. I think it was a chemist, if I remember rightly. Technically, we have a technical interview for some of our research and development type graduate programs, and that includes sort of, do they understand synthetic organic chemistry? Is drug discovery and development the sort of thing that's going to lend itself to the qualification that they have and the passions that they have? And this individual absolutely aced that. But some of the behaviours they sort of referenced during their values-based interview when they were discussing what they'd done in their life so far and how they worked and their kind of actions to get things done were just not at all collaborative in the way that science in the lab in 2021 needs to be, and not just within AstraZeneca. I mean, the industry is, remarkably well networked and matrixed, and we talked before this call started, Stephen, about the fact that you might be working with contract manufacturers, you might be working with supply chain, you might be working with internal groups across all various different functions in the organization, and representing our company to other peers in the industry and other crucial relationships that we hold dear, and that could include academia and research collaborations. It's not just about being that brilliant scientist who will crack something through their pure technical genius. Science isn't done, I don't think, that way in the modern age, and so being able to work collaboratively with the individuals, is really key. I specifically remember that the assessors saying they'd be a car crash in our lab. That individual would cause so many people issues that it would be a disruptive influence on our success as a team. So even though they're maybe genius, really, really strong, they just wouldn't work in the way that we need to work to be successful, and they were some way away from what we would experience. Now, that was a few years ago, and maybe that was a neurodiversity issue. Maybe it's something that now we would pick up by offering candidates the opportunity to disclose certain things about themselves before they enter into our process, so we could understand that when we consider their application. But that was the example in particular that always springs to mind.
Got it. Yes, it's interesting that, I hadn't thought that final point, because I can think back to my recruiting career, and the people who said technically brilliant, yes, none of us could work with this individual. So that's where if the people hiring people couldn't work with them, well, they're not going to put them into somebody else's bit of the business. And in my experience in answering that question, also it's around, it does come through in interviews. It's how they behave, maybe in an assessment centre, or it's the examples they use from just the other extracurricular stuff that comes to light through a selection process. I think recruiters are pretty good at picking that stuff out, aren't they? Eddie, I'm going to start going through some more of the questions now, because we've had a few through, so we should have time. If you've got any more questions, feel free to pop them into the box. One question through here, Eddie, do you want to take this one? So it's asking, what roles do you anticipate will grow in the future? Do you think there are going to be new and different roles sort of coming through within the industry?
100%. So I think, as we all have seen over the last year or so, even this need for digital talent, so talent that understands big data, data mining, AI, machine learning, even blockchain to a standard as well, I think is things that the industry is going to see and want a bit more. And I think that from a technical perspective, I think they're the areas that first spring to mind. But then, as Adam was talking about earlier, the kind of behavior stuff that our industry actually, I think, is all aligned in working quite collaboratively, and really streamlined, and actually using technology to solve some of our problems. I think those kind of skills also are really valuable. So yeah, if I was thinking about sectors, I would say, within the digital space, with it around surrounding data. I'd also say things around genomics as well. I think that's another massive area that a lot of organizations are kind of scrambling around, trying to kind of improve on now. But yeah, I think there would be the top few that are coming to mind at the moment.
And Lucy, can I ask you a slightly different question? But again, it's based on roles and possibly future roles, and it's also around actually that difference in commercial roles. What are you specifically looking for in the commercial roles that might be a bit different to other roles?
Yeah, sure. So at GSK, our commercial roles kind of divide to sort of the sales side. We have a number of roles in our organization where you'd be going out working with medical professionals or helping them understand the benefits of particular drugs or vaccines. And there are then marketing areas and areas within commercial looking a lot at data as well. So I think very, very varied skill sets in that sort of side of the business. A lot of kind of people-facing skills, which I think in the future economy will remain incredibly important, but also a lot more reliance on data. And I think definitely, to echo Eddie's points, AI, ML and big data management, and I think a lot more expectation that processes are going to be automated, people will have to be very comfortable working with numbers and insights, and I think that will definitely extend into commercial organizations as well. You know, often in commercial, then there's also kind of the business savviness you need as well to be making the right decision, and obviously that could be an interesting value set, probably to go back to the question directed at Adam around what people can get wrong. It is quite difficult, I think, in the pharma industry to remember that your customers are your patients, and of course that has to come first. You're there to deliver the best possible kind of patient, best medicine to patients. So balancing that with obviously a need to make sure that the organization can continue and be successful and develop more drugs does rely on then selling into that organization. So I think that balance of people skills and values is very important in the sales area too.
And a question that you might want to follow on with that I've had from Toby, Lucy, is around, actually, all of you talked a little bit about this demonstrating the passion for the sector, you know, and Toby's asking, how would students, I guess, articulate that outside of their studies, that passion for the, I mean, is it just researching and understanding the industry, or are there other ways that people can demonstrate that?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I have to say something that we've had a lot of interesting conversations about internally is when we talk about your motivation for the program, are we really talking about motivation for GSK specifically? Are we talking about motivation for pharma, or actually motivation for the job you're applying to? And I would say the voice from the business is increasingly around the job. I think hopefully it is self-evident that people will see the appeal of working for an organization where the work you do can improve people's lives and health. I think the important thing really, if students are preparing for assessment center and they're thinking about how to showcase that this is exactly the right role for them, is to not just focus on your knowledge of the organization. It helps to show you've done a bit of research, but that's almost a tick box exercise. I would say where the real passion tends to come through and where assessors tend to be really impressed is when a student really understands the role they've applied to and is really passionate about that. And very often that doesn't have to be, oh, you've got work experience there, or even it's the area you've studied, but they love stories about, you know, the kids that used to go to the junkyard and pick up old computers and try and repair them at home. Like, that's a gold dust to an assessor. So I think don't rule out your hobbies, your interests, and you're going all the way back to childhood. I think assessors really value understanding what it is that a student cares about, and that they will show up to work each day happy. Most of the time it's not the industry you're in, it's the job you're in. So I think that's probably where I would prioritize my efforts if I was a student.
And you're a strengths-based recruiter as well, aren't you, Lucy? Adam mentioned it.
Yes, we do as well. Yeah.
And have you found that's particularly a good sort of underpinning process for picking out some of those passions and motivations?
I think so. The engagement assessment is interesting, but Eddie touched on an interesting point earlier around, for example, neurodiversity, but actually a whole heap of issues around measures of engagement that might include eye contact that some people are more comfortable with than others. It can include how confident someone appears. And of course, we do our best to kind of baseline that engagement. So you're not, you know, using the same cues for everyone. You're trying to gauge it with individuals. But of course, we're asking our business leads to assess candidates, and they're not always experts in this. So actually, I think a lot of the motivation will be quite explicitly asked for. I think there's more, certainly we at GSK could do to help students understand what we mean when we say, why have you applied for this role? That actually the depth of that question and the areas we'd be interested to hear about. But probably it will be quite direct. When we assess motivation, that is a separate assessment to just looking at their engagement throughout the task and what they've enjoyed in the assessment process.
So I'm conscious of time. I've got a couple of questions here that I'm going to merge into one, and that will probably sort of take us pretty much to the end. And it's so the first question was around actually pointing out that actually that of course pharma has been very much in the public eye because of the pandemic over the last 14 months. So Melissa was asking about you know, will that impact future career ambitions of students? And also Toby posed another question, but also made the comment that everybody he knows works in pharma, you know, very empathetic, very caring. It is much about, you know, helping people, helping society, and I'd echo that. But he does mention that, of course, within some people's minds, big pharma doesn't have the best of reputations. So I was wondering actually if there's anything you Ed, would like to say about has that view changed over the past sort of 14 months, and is it something you're conscious of with students, or actually is it maybe something that students don't necessarily think too much? And also, as Toby says, is there anything more that that actually careers advisors can do to help people understand the industry a bit more, or encourage them to engage? So there's quite a bit in there, which is why I thought that's probably enough to take us to the end. So perceptions of the industry, are they changing, and is there more that actually our audience can do to help, you know, maybe change those perceptions or encourage people to dig a bit more to understand more? Who wants to put their hand up and take that one first?
I mean, I'll quickly just plug in and just say, like, I think one thing that we probably collectively agree with is we probably need to do a bit better about explaining what our industry does as well, and demystifying it. So, you know, sessions like this, I think, is like, you know, really good, and connecting with the students on that front, I think, is a really important thing that maybe we need to do as well. Sorry, Adam, you can go next.
Yeah, no, I think we have a real challenge, and part of the challenge is the nature of the way in which our industry is regulated in the UK in particular, around, you know, what we can say, what we can't say around drugs and the process, etc. You know, we've seen globally a lot of social media around vaccinations and pro and for and against vaccinations, and some of the messages that have come out around that, and it is often stemming from trust or suspicion or misunderstanding, but we are as an industry restricted in what we can say, so that makes it difficult, because sometimes I think perhaps silence, you know, is deemed to be a message in itself, but you know, we can't go out there and talk about the work that we're doing in our vaccines in a lot of instances, because it might be deemed to be promoting a medication, which in the UK you're not allowed to do. So there is that practical consideration. But I think, you know, I've worked in not a huge number of different industries, but I think we easily could say with confidence that the pharmaceutical industry is the one where I've seen most frequently the real passion and commitment of the people that work in it for the good of the patients. You know, they're devastated when a drug trial doesn't work, not because it's going to affect their annual bonus, but it's because the potential benefits to the patients that might be receiving, you know, critical care at that stage in their life aren't going to be met, because it's not hit a benchmark that we have to hit for the industry from a regulation perspective. So you know, we're a large organisation, as all of us on the panel are. You've got different people, different backgrounds, different experiences across the organisation, but you know, I would just say, you know, there's a lot of very hard-working, passionate people who give everything to their jobs in the pharmaceutical industry, and I think that should say something about where their motivations lie and what they're trying to achieve. Many of them, and you know, I'm astounded by the ingenuity and innovation and the skills and the kind of the nous, for want of a better word, that many of them have. They could make lots more money if they wanted to go and work in a different sector, some of them, and they choose to give their commitment to the industry because they believe in what we're trying to achieve and what that means for patients. And I think that's probably true of all of the people that we meet on a regular basis.
It's also, I think, lots of people don't quite understand the level of investment, you know, not just monetary investment, but time, resources to get, you know, a drug to market. You're talking decades sometimes, aren't you? And sometimes that investment just fails. It doesn't. You can invest in something for a long period of time, and it shows, you know, no return that you know that has to in a sense be covered by some of the other kind of activities or drugs. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, drug development is a multi-billion-dollar process, and you know, you front load a lot of that cost up front, and the products that don't get to market, you carry the costs for all of those in everyone that does get to market. And from a purely business model perspective, that has to be reflected in the commercial side of it. That being said, you know, you're also in a situation where you're granted a patent for 20 years for most products that you might manufacture, and you know, you trigger that patent at a certain stage of the research before it even gets to market. So the actual window that you have for recovering the costs of that is not the full 20 years. So it's you know, the commercial reality of it is tough and is competitive, and that's probably one of the frustrations. You know, many of those drug projects are really, really critically assessed within the industry at every stage gate of progressing to the next point, because to go from a clinical trial that might involve a few hundred patients who are experiencing, or sometimes a few dozen patients who are experiencing an illness that you're supporting and trying to get data on, you're trying to help, to then one that will be a few hundred or a few thousand, and then one that becomes a global clinical trial involving, you know, recruitment of patients all over the world, for example. You know, the pressure on the success is ramped up significantly. And then of course you've got the issue of, we're all competing. You know, the industry is competing in many of those therapy areas to be the first to market for that new you know, that new clinical standards in terms of patient experience. It's not like so many other industries. For a new drug to be licensed, to be produced, to be able to be used by patients for their benefit, it has to meet, you know, at least be best in class and then some from what's already on the market. You know, we're not producing something that we can, you know, see as a mediocre product and then just say, well, we've got some real slick marketing, so that won't matter. You know, we'll impress the market and get people to buy our product. That's just not the way the nature of the industry works. So there are a lot of hurdles, and rightly so. And you know, the regulation is strict and it's well respected. Just makes it more challenging and interesting to work in the sector, I think.
Definitely. And finally, last comments to you, Lucy. Anything you'd add to that in terms of sort of changing perceptions and works to increase understanding on the industry?
Yeah, I think, you know, we all hope that over the last year, pharma has been able to demonstrate the value it can add to society. I will, just to sort of summarize Adam's point there, say there is a line in The West Wing, which I will horribly misquote. I will always remember, where they say, you know, big pharma is all about manufacturing a pill for, you know, 3 cents and selling it for $10. But of course, the second pill costs maybe 3 cents. The first pill costs billions of dollars. And I think that's the point that people often forget, that actually it's not looking about maximizing all possible profits just to send home to shareholders. We have to sustain as a business, and we have to return profits in order to keep going as a business. But the vast majority of income that big pharma makes is reinvested into R&D and developing new medicines. So you know, I think hopefully the last year has demonstrated the value that can bring.
And also, I think time horizons, you know, one of the problems government has, it can't invest in things for 10 to 15 years because of an election cycle. So I should probably stop that there, because that's probably a whole other webinar in itself and a whole afternoon's conversation. So we've done actually, we've gone slightly over the hour, so we should probably close it off there. Lucy, Adam, Eddie, thanks very much. That was a really interesting conversation. If anybody's got any more questions, please route them through me at the ISE. More than happy to connect you with these guys. Really useful session in terms of helping understanding and demystifying the sector a little bit. So hope you all enjoy the rest of the day. Talk to you all soon. You'll get the video link a little bit later. As I said, please feel free to recap anything you think you missed, or to share it amongst your peers. Hopefully talk to you all again soon. Thank you very much, and thank you once again all.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks a lot. Bye.